25 years ago, Bill Gates said, we need banking, but we don't need banks anymore. Bill Gates was wrong. Since he made that statement, the big banks have got bigger, with more market share, more assets, and more customers than ever before. And I think it's because Bill Gates, 25 years ago, was a little bit naive and didn't really understand how banking works. We don't need banks to borrow money. We don't need banks to make payments. We don't need banks to do savings or investments. But we need banks to store money with trust. And that's where the rubber hits the road in banking. Because banks have decades of regulation. And that regulation makes them a very integral part of every country's economy. They're backed by governments. They guarantee not to lose our money. They have 5 times more regulation on average than the typical technology company. They're the most regulated industry in the world. And yes, they mess up sometimes. And yes, they are not liked, but they guarantee our money. The biggest weakness of banks right now is that they were built for the Industrial Revolution. They were built around paper, around checks, around cash, around passbooks, around ledgers. And those things are of the last century. And they need to completely change their business to be digital, because when you deal with a business model that focuses on the physical distribution of paper in a localized network of buildings and humans, it doesn't make sense when we live in a world of the digital distribution of data in a globalized network focused on software and servers. And that's why there's been this massive rise of a new industry called Fintech, integrating finance with technology, rather than finance versus technology. It's starting to come together, to integrate, because money is just data these days. And the fintech community has seen massive investments. Last year alone, $111.8 billion invested in fintech startup companies, more than twice the amount of the year before. And this has been building for over a decade. So we've seen thousands of startup companies doing interesting things around financial services that are very specialized around payments, borrowing, saving, and investing. And what's interesting is that the breakout companies that are the unicorns are founded by people who are really young, typically Gen Y or Gen X, under the age of 40, Gen Z. Teenagers are even creating new organizations and new ideas around financial services because they can code, because they don't like the system as it is. They want to change the system with technology, and they are. The new system is being built on the platforms designed by teenagers and kids. That's the world we live in today. And some of these people are even former bankers. Nikolai, who founded Revolut, one of Europe's breakout unicorns, was working for Lehman Brothers in September 2008 when the old financial system collapsed. He's building a new financial system. As are these guys, John and Patrick Collinson, 2 brothers from Ireland, who started a business called Stripe in 2010 when they were 21 and 19 years old. They now run one of the biggest fintech unicorns in the world, valued at $9.2 billion in October 2016, and more than doubling in value, such that in October 2018, they're valued at $20 billion. Not bad for a couple of kids. What strikes me as I talk about this is that a lot of the financial system that I've dealt with all my life is run by people like Jamie Dimon. They're not kids, they're my generation, slightly gray, slightly wrinkled. And he's running an organization that has 235,000 people, valued at $245 billion in October 2016, when this fledgling 5-year-old company, Stripe, was valued at $9.2 billion with 400 people. So Stripe's generating more than 22 times more value per person than JP Morgan Chase. And Jamie Dimon said, look, we can't let Silicon Valley eat our lunch. And so he's reorganized the whole of that bank to be more like a technology company, investing in fintech startups, building their own fintech campus, automating everything that can be automated across their business, which is the reason why 1/3 of their people disappeared in 2 years, and their value increased by 50%. They're using artificial intelligence, distributed ledger systems, machine learning, apps and APIs and open banking, all the technologies that can digitalize financial services are being deployed within this institution. And the results can be quite stunning. So for example, in 1 second, JP Morgan can process analytics that historically took 360,000 hours of legal time. There's 1,500 lawyers sacked right there, which may be a good thing. They're spending $11 billion on technology a year. 2 years of JP Morgan's IT budget is the whole of the amount invested in fintech in Europe. They used to spend 20% on innovation. They now spend 30% on innovation, $3 billion a year. And that will probably increase to 50% in the next few years, $5 or $6 billion a year on innovation. They have more developers than Facebook and Twitter combined. I'm not saying that's a good thing. 50,000 developers and technologists in a 165,000 employee bank. But that's why it is the technology company that does banking. And it's changing its model, its structure to be digital. Because they don't want to be disrupted by the fintech community. They want to be the disruptor. And that's a big attitude change. And to be a disruptor as a bank when you're 220 years old, you have to change the mindset of the bank. In fact, I think of fintech as being the marriage of a parent-child relationship. Financial services is the parent that wants resilience, stability, security. And technology is the child that wants to challenge everything and argue everything and change the future and design a whole new world. And that's why a lot of the fintech startups have as their cultural values doing good for society with technology, doing good for the planet with technology, because they're Gen Y and Gen Z. Now, I spent a long time where I didn't have any children, because I was denied children. I was a child denier. I now have 2 little boys, Eddie and Freddie. They're 3 years old. Thank you. Thank you. I love them to pieces. They had their 3rd birthday at the end of March, and they're twins. But I spent years thinking I'd never have kids, because I was denied the opportunity of having children. And all those years, I actually justified it, because I thought to myself, why would I want to bring kids into this world that's screwed, that's morally bankrupt, that has governments and corporations messing up this planet and doing things for their own lining of their own pockets rather than for the future? In fact, the culture I grew up in is where greed is good. I'm here for my bonus. I'm here for my wallet. I'm not here for you. I'm here for me. Greed is good. It's not good. Because with great power comes great responsibility, and that's what banks have. Great power. And have they been responsible for their actions? Are they accountable for their actions? I think they should be, and I don't think they are. It stunned me the other day to read that since 1988, just 100 companies have been destroying our planet. 71% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from just 100 companies since 1988. Over half comes from just 25 companies. The fossil fuel companies, the Shells, the BPs, the ExxonMobil. If the banks stopped supporting these companies, we could change planet Earth almost overnight, because these companies would go bust. But the banks fund them, finance them, support them, because they're making a buck. Now, some kids don't agree with this. Our children don't agree with this. I don't agree with this. Greta Thunberg doesn't agree with this. Some decision makers have known exactly what priceless values they've been sacrificing to line their own pockets, to make unimaginable amounts of money. We can't continue to do that if we are to survive, because this planet has a short clock, a short window. Now, the good news is that there are some things happening with technology and finance that is doing good for society and good for planet Earth. These are cultural values that sit at the backbone of many of these fresh young startups, because they're being started up by Gen Z and Gen Y individuals who want to make a change. Technology can change the planet. Technology can change the world. They're reaching parts of the world that were historically unreachable. There's lots of fintech startups who are looking at how can we provide financial literacy to our children. Kids aren't taught anything about money in school, but they should be, as that's what controls our lives when you come out of school. The mentally ill are often the ones that have the worst financial problems. They have the worst addictions. They may gamble or have alcoholism or drug addictions. How you can solve that is to look at their spending patterns and support them. Provide financial wellness to create mental wellness. And there's lots of fintech startups focused on financial wellness. Our parents and our grandparents are the most vulnerable in society to criminals and scammers. Can we help them to make them less vulnerable? Of course we can. But the banks never used to do any of this because it wasn't worth it. It's not profitable. In fact, financial inclusion is one of the biggest growth areas in fintech, where historically it's not been worth banking 4.5 billion people in planet Earth because it's just not going to make a profit. Yet digital inclusion can reach every single human on Earth if you have a mobile phone, of which most of us do. As soon as you have a mobile phone, you can trade, transact, and talk, and get opportunity. And this has been proven over and over again by people worldwide. My favorite example is Vijay Shankar Sharma. He's a billionaire out of India, which I guess that's why he looks so happy. He runs a company called Paytm. It's one of the biggest mobile financial operators in India with over 300 million users. If you go anywhere in India, you can use Paytm mobile wallets using QR codes. I was in Bangalore recently and went to a temple, and literally the temple said, give charity money to us, either in cash or using Paytm, his mobile financial system. The reason why it's my favorite story is not because Vijay is a billionaire, but because 10 years ago he was homeless. He's 40 years old. When he was 30, he was bankrupted by his friends. They're not his friends anymore. He was literally sofa surfing. And to get a job interview, he had to work out whether to have lunch that day and walk to the job interview, or take the bus and not have anything to eat. It was literally as stark as that. And yet today he's one of India's youngest multi-billionaires, running a mobile financial technology system called Paytm. Now his story is really interesting because he was inspired by Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba in China. And Alibaba, you may well know, is one of the amazing success stories of a big tech giant coming out of the Chinese country. In fact, what's interesting for me is nearly all of the vision around technology is coming out of Asia and Africa and South America. It's not coming out of Europe and America. And a lot of that's because Europe and America is running on legacy infrastructure, whereas China's created a whole new infrastructure. In fact, Jack Ma's company, Alibaba, launched a payment system called Alipay, which is one of the most successful financial services in the world. It doesn't just allow you to pay for things. You can save, invest, and borrow. And you can borrow for 24 hours. You don't have to borrow for a year. We only have borrowing for a year because of the old financial model of distributing paper through branches. Now, digitally, you can borrow for as long as you need it. What's amazing about these numbers, this is the mobile payments in China with WeChat Pay and Alipay, who combined have 80% of the market. And over half of that is with Alipay. Is that last year, 277 trillion yuan was paid for through QR codes and mobile phones in China. That's 41 trillion US dollars. 41 trillion US dollars. You compare that to the USA, where they transacted around $200 billion on mobile payments last year, and you can see the scale of the difference. In fact, most of China is now cashless in the big cities for that reason. But one of the things you may not know is that within this phenomenal success story of Alipay and Alibaba, and this amazing amount of money being transacted through mobile phones, in Alipay, about 256,000 transactions per second. Visa processes about 2,000 transactions a second. So these guys are scaling massively across all of China, and in fact across all of the world, because they're the power behind Paytm. Jack Ma invested in Vijay. But the story I love the best is that one individual in Alipay 3 years ago had a little idea. I thought, can we change people's behaviors to be greener, to behave more sustainably? And so they created a game in the payment system where every time you pay for something, it monitors how green your behaviors are. If you drive to work and use the gas station, you get 0 points. If you take the bus, you get 5 points. If you walk or cycle to work, you get 10 points. And what do points make? Trees. The game's all about getting points to plant a virtual tree. But what actually happens is that when you get enough points to plant a virtual tree, Alipay, Alibaba, plant a tree in real life on your behalf. And they have 500 million people playing this game. 500 million people planting virtual trees has resulted in 100 million real trees being planted in China, in the most arid areas of outer Mongolia and the deserts. And it's covering 1,000 square kilometers, which, by all estimates, by the end of next year, should reduce China's carbon emissions by 5%. From one little idea, from one person working for a financial company. And I think that's where the future really ends or starts, which is little ideas from people can make massive differences. And those ideas can come from technology doing good for the planet and good for society and good for financial services rather than keeping it as greed is good. Because I want my kids to have a future. I'm sure you do too. And this is the way in which I think we'll achieve it. Thank you.